Melanie here from International TEFL Academy in Costa Rica. Thanks for tuning in to our grammar presentations. Those of you that are already teaching English, we hope this is a good opportunity for you to refresh the content that you need to teach so you can be more confident in the classroom. And those of you that are thinking about teaching English abroad, we hope this is the first step in embarking in that journey. Let's get started. Today we're going to look at the conditionals, and we're going to start by looking at the first conditional. Okay, let's look at our first example. It reads, if it rains, we will cancel the game. We have two clauses in this statement, and this is a possible scenario, a likely situation about the present or the future. All conditional sentences will have the word if. And all conditional sentences will have actions and consequences, or cause and effect, if you will. So first conditional is no exception. To form the first conditional sentence, we must have a clause that starts with if and is followed by the present simple conjugation of the verb, in this case, rain. Our consequence will be with the future will, which is always followed by an infinitive or a base verb. Let's look at another example or two to make sure we understand the first conditional. If I go to the party, I'll give you a ride. Again, this is a possible scenario, something that really could happen. I have if and the present simple go in my action clause and will plus the infinitive give in my consequence. And finally, Tim will eat fish if he goes to the beach. You'll notice I changed the order of where my if is. However, Tim eating fish is still dependent on him going to the beach. So if is followed by present simple goes, and will is followed by the infinitive. Okay, to recap, first conditional are possible scenarios, if plus present simple in the action, and will plus the infinitive in the consequence.
You didn't write it. Really
Now let's take a look at the second conditional. My first example for the second conditional reads, if I won the lottery, I would quit my job. For second conditional, we're looking at scenarios or situations that are hypothetical. They're unlikely to happen. And even though it's a different scenario than the first conditional, it still has many of the same components, including the if and an action clause and a consequence clause. To form a sentence in the second conditional, we're going to start our action clause with if and follow it by a verb conjugated in the past simple. In the consequence, I'm going to use my modal would, which is also followed by an infinitive or the base form of the verb. Let's look at a couple more examples of the second conditional. If I moved to France, I would learn French. Me learning French is depending on me moving to France. In the action clause of my sentence, I have if followed by the verb move conjugated in the past simple, which is moved. And in the consequence, I have would plus the infinitive learn. And in my last example, Tim would be famous if he married a celebrity. Tim being famous is dependent on him marrying a celebrity. Again, I changed the order of the conditional, but I can still find my if and see it's followed by a past simple verb, and in the consequence, would is followed by the infinitive be. Okay, to recap second conditional, let's remember that we're talking about hypothetical situations, scenarios that are unlikely to happen. To construct my second conditional sentences, I will have if followed by a verb conjugated in the past simple in the action of my sentence, and the consequence clause will need my modal would, which should always be followed by an infinitive or a base verb.
If you had to change one thing about yourself, what would it be? Alright. If I had to change one thing about myself, I would change my fear of heights. I am terrified of heights, And I feel like the best way to fix that is through exposure therapy, which is why I'm going bungee jumping this Sunday. So hopefully I do change that.
Good.
All right, I will go. If you moved to Japan, would you learn Japanese? If I moved to Japan, I would learn Japanese. I would try to learn Japanese. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Would you be happy if you married a celebrity? I mean, if I loved the person, I think I would be happy, but I wouldn't like all of the attention.
Mm-hmm.
What would you do today if we didn't have class? I should say I would study, but I would probably go out and hang out with my friends and enjoy Costa Rica.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, we will take a look at the third conditional. Of the three conditionals we're looking at today, third conditional uses the most complicated grammatical structures. So let's take our time to look at third conditional and make sure we understand it well. My first example reads, if I hadn't moved to Costa Rica, I wouldn't have met my husband, which is a true story, people. So, looking at this scenario, I know I'm talking about the past tense. And what I can tell by looking at this example is that I did move to Costa Rica and I did meet my husband. Therefore, third conditional is talking about the opposite of what really happened, or the unreal past. To form the third conditional sentence, I will still have an if, I will still have my action, I will still have a consequence. However, the grammatical structures used are depending on what's happened in the past. So in the action clause of my sentence, I will use if, which needs to be followed by the past perfect, which is had, and a past participle. In the consequence clause of my third conditional, I will be using the modal would followed by have in the infinitive form, and then another past participle. Okay, let's analyze a couple more examples of the third conditional. If I had set my alarm, I wouldn't have arrived late. Knowing what we know about the third conditional, we can see that in reality, I did not set my alarm. In the if clause or the action clause of my third conditional, I'm using a positive verb, which means in reality, it did not happen. In the consequence, I'm using a negative verb, which tells me that in reality, it did happen. I did arrive late. And finally, we would have had the game if it hadn't rained. Again, I changed the order of our sentence, but we can still find our if. And I can see in my if clause the negative verb hadn't, which means in reality it did rain, because we're imagining the opposite of what really happened. And in the consequence, I'm using a positive verb, would have had the game, which means in reality we did not have the game. Okay, to quickly review third conditional, let's remember that we're talking about the opposite of what really happened in the past. So this is the unreal past. Okay, to construct the third conditional, I will have if plus had plus a past participle in my action clause, and my consequence clause will have would plus have plus another past participle. Okay, let's review. If she doesn't call by noon, we'll call her. This is an example of first conditional. We can see that this is a scenario that is possible. It really could happen. And to construct the sentence, we use if plus a present simple verb in the action, and the consequence will have will and an infinitive. Again, possible situations. The second conditional, if she was president, we would live in peace. This is an example of a sentence that is hypothetical. To construct this sentence, we use if plus a verb in the past simple for our action and would plus an infinitive in the consequence. Second conditional, hypothetical situations. And finally, the third conditional. If he hadn't stolen the money, he wouldn't have been fired. To construct this sentence, we have if plus had plus a past participle in the action, and the consequence will have would plus have plus another past participle. This is the unreal past.